Veteran of the war with a disability, Jake Sully leads a routine existence in the United States. He spends his days lamenting his decisions, picking fights in bars, and thinking back on his earlier days, but he had no idea that his life was about to fall apart. One day, he is approached by some officials who inform him that his twin brother Tom has been killed. Even though Jake is crushed by the news, the authorities want to engage him to finish the unfinished business left by his brother. It turns out that Tom had intended to look into a recently discovered planet called Pandora, which reportedly harbors life similar to that on Earth. After giving the idea some thought, Jake agrees right immediately when the officials say that he will be compensated in millions. He is then placed into a 6-year cryogenic hibernation to prepare for the mission. When he wakes up, he is traveling to Pandora with a number of other people. Granted that Jake and his sibling had a perfect genetic match, he was granted this unique opportunity. In the following scene, a shuttle is used to take Jake and the rest of the team to Pandora. The planet's atmosphere is too toxic for humans to survive. Only 20 seconds of exposure will kill them in 4 minutes. Thus everyone is instructed to wear full-face respirators. Jake immediately heads to a military conference where Colonel Miles Quaritch is speaking to the assembled soldiers and a few accompanying citizens. After touching down on the mystery planet, he tells them about the Na'vi, the natives of Pandora, and warns them that they must obey the local laws if they wish to survive. Later, when Jake is in a research center, Norm Spellman, a biologist, introduces himself. She allows him to see his customized avatar for the first time. It is then told that a human may blend in on the world of Pandora and behave like a Na'vi's if they link to their avatar, a genetically altered Na'vi hybrid. The program's science lead, Dr. Grace Augustine, then awakens in a specially built pod that connects her to her avatar as Jake and Norm enter the science department. She appears irate and rushes out of the room as Norm tries to introduce her to Jake. She's probably simply upset about turning into an extraterrestrial. Grace then approaches Parker Selfridge, a member of the Resources Development Administration, RDA, and the base commander. All military personnel and other staff members stationed at the colony are under the control of a firm called RDA. She tries to persuade Parker that Jake is useless because he doesn't have functional legs and isn't a scientist. Parker counters by claiming that Jake is the only individual who shares the same genes as his brother Tom, which are crucial for activating his avatar. Jake and Norm are connected to their avatars in the lab the following morning. Jake's avatar then wakes up shortly later in a different room. Unexpectedly, he can now walk and move his legs, something he hasn't done in years. He hurries to the recreation area where several other avatars are playing sports and having a good time, disregarding his doctor's advice because he is overjoyed. The link is later destroyed, while Jake's avatar is sleeping, causing him to awaken in his human form. He then introduces himself to the Colonel and starts talking. When Jake asks what the real reason for their travel to the planet is, the Colonel finally reveals it to him: unobtainium, an exceedingly rare type of rock that is valued at billions of dollars on Earth, is reportedly found on Pandora. The Na'vi people live in a hamlet where the best and biggest unobtainium rocks may be discovered. Jake will have to find a method to persuade them to leave, though, because they won't want humans encroaching on their territory. Jake has 3 months to flawlessly blend in with the Na'vi people and convince them to seek for a new home. The Colonel says Jake will receive new legs if the mission is a success. A military squad will be sent in at the end of the 3 months if the Na'vi people continue to refuse to leave, which will probably result in the extinction of the entire race. The following day, Grace, Norm, and others fly above Pandora's surface, while Jake interacts with his avatar. After landing, they start gathering samples of the local vegetation. Jake, who is very unfamiliar with the strange surroundings, gets lost and falls into a field of flowers. Jake is separated from his friends when a weird beast, a Thanator that resembles a panther, appears from behind and hunts him. Fortunately, he escapes by jumping under a waterfall, while the Thanator is roaring over him. After some time of searching for him, Jake's group decides to head home as it grows dark. Jake can be seen making a spear out of a long stick at night, after having lost all of his weapons. A female Na'vi is keeping watch over him in the meantime. When an enigmatic light entity lands on her bow, she stops trying to shoot him with an arrow. Jake is attacked by a pack of viper wolves at the same moment. This time, it appears as though he has met his end for sure, but strangely, the female Na'vi comes to his rescue and drives the wolves away. She, however, is not happy with Jake and tells him to go back to his proper position. Jake then begins to follow her as she gets ready to leave. Additionally, he asks her to teach him how to survive. The Na'vi initially declines to assist him, but after many of the enigmatic luminous things from earlier land on Jake's body, she is moved and brings him to a Matakaya. Additionally, she identifies herself as Neytiri. When they arrive at the specified location, the Na'vi people, particularly Tsudi, Neytiri's fiancé and the heir apparent, turn hostile toward the stranger right away and demand the instant execution of the hybrid human. Neytiri, who is also the tribe's king and queen, intervenes to stop them and brings Jake to her parents. Jake informs them that he is a fighter, and that his objective is to become familiar with their customs and culture. The queen pricked his chest and licked his blood when she heard this. After determining that he possesses a pure spirit, she invites Neytiri to serve as his teacher and guide. Jake is led to his bed, which envelops him like a cocoon, following a ritual gathering. Human Jake is revived in the room as he nods off. He tells Grace and the other scientists about his surreal experience in the morning, but the colonel cautions him once more that he has only 3 months to finish his mission. The human Jake is next shown recording a video log of his daily activities in which he describes his experiences. He mentions how Neytiri and his avatar are hard at work in their training. She once requests that he select a scound, an odd-looking animal, as his mount. He is first opposed to the notion, but ultimately decides on one and disconnects his cerebral trigger from its antenna. He gains control of the scan and takes pleasure in writing it. The Colonel and Parker are later informed about the massive home tree, the Navi's mansion, and a significant unobtainium deposit beneath it by human Jake. Jake asks to be given the chance to talk to the Navi and persuade them to leave, before the Colonel has a chance to cut down the tree. The Hallelujah Mountains are a remote area of large floating islands that are sacred to the Navi. When Grace discovers that Jake is being used as a pawn, she moves him there. It turns out that she is only visiting Pandora for scientific purposes, and has no interest in the unobtainium rocks. One day, as Jake and Neytiri are flying on their own, a Torek, a soaring mountain creature with bright colors that despises anything that flies, unexpectedly pursues them. Fortunately, they are able to get away, and Neytiri shows Jake the remains of the previous Torek there on the family tree. She says that her great-grandfather was the last person to ride a Torek, and he did so to unite the 5 Na'vi tribes during a trying time. Neytiri continues by saying that no one has ventured to ride a Torek in many years. The Na'vi tribe begins to accept Jake as one of their own, as the days go by, and they even throw a celebration in his honor. After the ritual, Neytiri leads him to a place of prayer where they link with a tree using the nerve endings at the tips of their long hair. He is now free to choose a woman as his wife, according to Neytiri. After giving it some thought, Jake declares his desire to wed her. Despite her obvious shock, Neytiri agrees to the proposal, and the two kiss. The new pair then spends the rest of the evening together under the tree, while Jake awakens in the lab. The result is confusion. Neytiri wakes up in the morning to the sound of fallen trees and sees numerous bulldozers devastate the area. As they are being attacked, she becomes aware of it and makes every effort to dredge Jake to safety. Jake is preparing to connect with his avatar at their isolated location in the meantime, and when he finally awakens, he gets onto one of the bulldozers and makes an attempt to stop it. He destroys its camera system after trying everything else in vain, forcing the soldiers to open fire on him. Fortunately, Jake succeeds in escaping and making it to the house tree. The colonel at the base reviews the security footage and recognizes Jake as the avatar who tried to obstruct their mission. The bulldozers continue to work and ruin the Amatakaya's sacred spot, as he enters the room in a fit of wrath, searching for Jake and Grace. Under the house tree, the Na'vi gather and decide to fight the invaders. Jake and Grace object to it and try to dissuade them from doing it. Despite being betrothed to Neytiri, the warrior Tsudi attempts to kill Jake when he learns about their union. As things get heated, the colonel abruptly breaks the connection between Grace and Jake's avatars and their human forms, causing both of them to lose consciousness. A furious Grace confronts the RDA and military leaders in the following scene, and reveals that the Na'vi have access to a network constructed of Pandora's trees that contains more neural connections than the human brain. She and Jake go on to say that the Na'vi will never leave their home tree, or leave their current location. The Colonel decides to raid the home tree, and use gas bombs to chase the Na'vi away. After hearing this, Jake, who is alarmed, begs Parker, the base commander, for permission to use his avatar, so that he might persuade the Na'vi to depart. Parker complies, but he reminds Jake that he only has an hour to do his task. When he is back among the Na'vi, he notifies them of the human invasion, and shares his own identity with them. Hearing this, Neytiri confronts Jake for breaching her confidence. Jake and Grace are taken prisoner by the other Na'vi, who are as upset. They then get ready to battle the humans who have appeared in numerous flying ships. After this, the war then starts. Despite their best efforts, the Na'vi's bows and arrows can't stand a chance against the powerful weapons used by humans. Unfortunately, the home tree is ultimately knocked down after multiple explosions, killing several Na'vi in the process. The Queen unexpectedly stops by the humans who are being held captive during the commotion and frees them. Then, she pleads with them to help save their tribe. Jake approaches Neytiri right away, and unsuccessfully tries to comfort her. Neytiri's father is gravely wounded during the attack, and as he is dying, he commands her to take his sacred bow and lead his people. Jake and Grace abruptly revert to their human forms, and they are then arrested for treason. Norm is also detained for trying to prevent soldiers from turning off their avatar forms. The surviving Na'vi, meanwhile, assemble at the Tree of Souls. Jake and his companions are covertly released by their team pilot, Trudy, back at the base. They take off in her spaceship after that and try to find the Na'vi. Unfortunately, the bad colonel sees them along the route and fires at the spacecraft. Grace is severely hurt, and it seems as though she will pass out. The gang eventually arrives at the floating mountains, where Jake hops into a pod and emerges as his avatar. He then makes the bold decision to enlist the help of his scoundrel, and embark on a mission to find the Torek, despite being certain that the Na'vi will not welcome him. Though his plan is straightforward, it might easily lead to his demise. The hazardous Torek is then approached gently by Jake, who leaps atop its back. We see him riding the Torek to the Tree of Souls in the midst of the Amatikean rite. All the Na'vi are shocked by this, and they finally give him a respectful greeting when he returns. The Na'vi instructs the warrior Tsudi to help Jake fight the human army, after he pleads for his help. With the Queen by his side, Jake is now attempting to revive his dying companion Grace. All of their attempts, however, are infutile because Grace eventually dies from her wounds. Due to Jake's ensuing rage, the Na'vi band together to drive the humans out of their territory. They approach their enemy clans by day's end, and gather about 2,000 more Na'vi. The Colonel, meantime, turns his focus to the Tree of Souls, after observing the Na'vi in great numbers. He gives the order and his men march in that direction. He was shocked to see the Na'vi appear as well, both on the ground and in the air. Tsudi and the other warriors are prepared to give their lives in exchange for their land, and Jake is flying in the sky on his fabled Torek. Soon, a bloody conflict breaks out, and both sides begin to accumulate bodies. This time, the scouts force the human artillery to gradually start to fail. The Colonel's Dragonfly ship is pursuing Jake during all of this, and firing at him. Fortunately, Trudy shows up just in time and starts firing at the Colonel, giving Jake just enough time to get away. Tsudi is also killed in the explosion, while Neytiri's scound is shot down and killed. Neytiri sees the destruction from below and becomes alarmed. A huge bomb ship is currently sailing for the Tree of Souls. It appears that people will ultimately get their way. However, a battalion of Titanotheres, Pandora's heavily armored dinosaur-like creatures, appear out of nowhere and charge the soldiers through the remnants of the nearby forest. Neytiri, who is overjoyed, rejoins the battle with a number of Pandora's species following her. Unexpectedly, when a Thanator emerges close, it bows down to her. Then, Jake accelerates his Torek into the air to meet the bomb ship. As the military's ground soldiers disperse in disarray, he bombards the ship with grenades, causing it to crash a long way from the Tree of Souls. Jake fires explosives at the Colonel's spacecraft as well, but the Colonel manages to escape in an amphibious suit. before the spacecraft catches fire and explodes. Sadly, the Colonel finds himself at Grace's improvised camp. The Thanator who Neytiri had associated with attacks him as he tries to switch off Jake's avatar pod. Surprisingly, he uses his suit to kill it, trapping Neytiri underneath in the process. However, Jake shows up at the scene in his avatar before the Colonel has a chance to kill her. The two then engage in a back and forth exchange, with the Colonel ultimately winning. The Colonel is about to kill Jake when Neytiri stands up and fires an arrow at him, impaling him through the chest. She fires a second arrow without delay, instantly killing the Colonel. He's already caused enough harm to Jake's pod, though, before he passes away. As a result, human Jake is still awake, but is having trouble breathing and putting on a mask. Fortunately, Neytiri appears and helps him get his mask. She then cradles human Jake and receives her first close-up view of his actual physique. Jake explains that he has been chosen to permanently transfer his consciousness to his avatar. In the closing scene of the video log, in a ritual that marks the end of the movie, Jake emerges from sleep in his avatar form, with Neytiri keeping watch over him. This conclusion represents Jake's dedication to assimilating fully into Na'vi culture, and to live among them on Pandora. The movie finishes with a feeling of cohesion and optimism for Jake and the Na'vi people's future. Subscribe for more content like this. Don't forget to turn on notifications and leave a like to support the channel. Thank you for watching.